to Adjusted Reality, a podcast series trusted by the adjusted and brought to you by the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress, where we learn from athletes, celebrities, influencers, and healthcare professionals about how to optimize health in a fun, relatable way. Join me, Dr. Sherry McAllister, as I speak to former NHL player Theo Fleury about how his childhood trauma led to him with alcohol and drug addiction that would eventually end his NHL career. He shares his story to teach others how to break down the barriers. Theo Fleury is perhaps best known for his time as a former professional ice hockey player, and may I add, a fantastic one. But off the rink, his life once carried the markings of a troubled childhood, abuse, and coping with emotional pain through addictive and self-destructive behaviors. Today, Theo Fleury defines as a victor over trauma and addiction, and as a facilitator to those still trying to find their way. His best-selling books, Playing with Fire and Conversations with a Rattlesnake, encourage open sharing and provide practical tools that people seeking help can personally use. As a motivational speaker, Theo tells his story to raise awareness of abuse and childhood trauma for the purpose of destigmatizing shame. Theo has been awarded the Canadian Humanitarian Award and the Queen's Jubilee Medallion. He is a Siksika Nation Honorary Chief and recipient of the Aboriginal Indspire Award. He also holds 2 honorary doctorates, one in science from the University of Guelph-Humber for outstanding contributions to the mental health of Canadians, and another in law from Brandon University for his work in combating child abuse and promoting healing and recovery. I cannot tell you how excited I am to have you today, Theo. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for asking me to do this.
So we're going to start with the adjusted reality. We have learned, especially during a pandemic, that mental and physical health are inextricably linked, and that means we need to dig down into the roots of how our mental health is doing, so our physical health is doing. You've been in an amazingly tough sport for your entire life, where physical abuse on the ice was the norm. In fact, I know very few NHL hockey players who didn't quit because of a lack of love for the sport, but ended up because it was just physically brutal on the ice. So, because our listeners are very much into their health and their wellness, let's just start with the easy. An NHL player, how did you keep your physical health really at tune because of the roughness of the sport, and also knowing that you have these emotional traumas that you are working through? So let's start with, how did you keep yourself able to get 7 Olympic medals physically? I mean, it's an amazing accomplishment.
Well, first and foremost, hockey was always easy for me. Mm-hmm. So, God blessed me with, some incredible talent. And, whenever I stepped in the rink, it was my happy place. And like I said, it was really easy, even despite the fact that well, I would say one of the first adversities that I had to overcome was my size.
Right.
I wish I had $1 for every time somebody told me I was too small, because I wouldn't have to play in the NHL and make all that money. I would have been rich beyond rich,
I love it. For our listeners and those that maybe not have come in contact with you, describe your size to us, because I know most may not know that an average NHL player is pretty thick and tall.
Mm-hmm. So when I broke into the NHL, the average height was 6 feet, the average weight was 200 pounds, and I am 5'6", 150 pounds. So everybody was 6 inches taller and 50 pounds heavier than I was. And so there was always this knock that, that I wouldn't be able to take the heavy going or, whatever. But, I managed to eke out a 15-year career in the NHL where I played over 1,100 games. And, but I can tell you that today, all of that physical beating that I took, shows up every morning when I'm trying to get out of bed. That's for sure. I'm full of arthritis and got neck and back problems, but
okay, let's just explore that.
I knew what I was getting myself into.
Yes. So as a professional athlete, and many do, especially in football as well as hockey, they come out of the sport with some very serious chronic pain. Just dive into it with me for a bit and tell me, when you were playing and where you are now, what are some of the things that you do for your best interest of the pain and keeping yourself mobile and agile? And for those that have never met Theo Fleury, I can tell you, watching him on the ice is like fluid. It's like a ballerina in play, fluid, agile, really, really sharp on the edges, and just being able to really outsmart and outskate most players. So it's a blessing to watch you, as I have in my past days. But tell us now a little bit about how you're dealing with some of this chronic pain.
Yeah. Well, I think I was okay till I turned 50, and as soon as I turned 50, then everything started to fall apart. And so, I was doing, I was doing physio. I went to a chiropractor, gentleman, and that's when we discovered that he took an x-ray of my neck and basically said to me, he says, you had so much whiplash because of getting hit that your fifth and sixth vertebrae have basically fused together. And so that's where I have most of my pain, but I do acupuncture. I have a gal that stretches me out once every 2 weeks to try to get rid of the fascia and all of that. So I do as much as I can, and I am a big golfer. And so that is my new addiction, is I am obsessed with the game of golf. And yeah, so I do everything I can. I also bought a infrared sauna as well, and that has seemed to help with managing the pain and whatnot. So and I take CBD twice a day for pain as well, and it seems to help. So I'll try and do anything when it comes to feeling better.
I think that's one of the things that really makes professional athletes so aware of their body, is they also understand it's not just one thing that's going to make a difference. It's being able to logistically collaborate with other healthcare providers. I got a chiropractor, I've got a physiotherapist, I've got an acupuncturist, and I love hearing that you're keeping up with it. And I know you're still very physically active, and being out there on the golf course is a true blessing. I think that it not only helps our physical being out there and enjoying the fresh air, but also our mental. So let's go into your mental area of where you've been on the healing journey. And for us, I want to start back with the struggles in your childhood. Can you share a little bit about that to our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in a home where both my parents experienced childhood trauma, and that manifested itself into addictive behavior as a coping mechanism, right? So I grew up in a home that was chaotic, sometimes violent, bit of neglect, you name it. And so I was this phenom hockey player as well at the same time, because I discovered hockey. Thank God I did. Because everything I wasn't getting at home, I stepped in the rink. I got love, I got teammates, friends, people looked after me, you name it. So, and I always had this dream that someday, I was going to play in the NHL. And I don't know how many 6-year-olds that are that focused and motivated that they're already telling people that someday they're going to play professional hockey. But I was that kid, and I was that focused at a very young age. And so as I climbed the ladder, scouts started to come and watch me play. And when I was 14 years old, I was drafted into the Western Hockey League, which is a big feeder to the NHL. I think 65% of all players that play in the NHL come from one of the 3 junior hockey leagues in Canada. And so I was drafted by the Winnipeg Warriors in the second round of the Bantam draft. And the summer after I was drafted, the guy that drafted me came to my house and basically said to my parents, we think Theo needs better coaching, better competition, and we'd love for him to move to Winnipeg. So I moved to Winnipeg when I was 15 years old. And needless to say, that choice and that decision would change me for the rest of my life, because over the next 2.5 years, this coach, raped me 150 times. And so, what I was left with was a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of anger, a lot of resentment. And there wasn't anybody in the world that I could have told what was going on, because I knew first and foremost that if I told, that would be the end of my hockey career. And second of all, I knew I would be believed. And so I kept the secret inside for the next 27 years. And quickly discovered that, alcohol was a great coping mechanism for emotional pain that was left behind from those 2 experiences. And so, I was addicted almost immediately. And then, like I said, spent the next 27 years basically, coping with, this emotional pain, that really I had, it wasn't my fault, right? But I didn't know that at the time, and so 2003, I got kicked out of the NHL because I couldn't stop drinking, couldn't stop doing drugs, and my behavior was, completely out of control. But what happened was, and what also showed up for the first time, was my mental illness. I was having panic attacks. I was, suffering from depression, anxiety, all of these things. And so it finally came to a head, and I left the game, and then 5,812 days ago,
wow,
I got sober.
Congratulations.
And started down this road of, healing.
All right, stop right there. Let me just back up for a second. Healing comes to people in many different ways. Sometimes it's a person that really inspires them to make that moment of change. Sometimes it's a reality where you literally look into yourself in the mirror and you say, I can't do this anymore. I cannot live like this anymore. Tell me what the tipping point in your life was that led you down that path to recovery of what you were going through. What was that moment like? Tell me more about it.
Well, almost 17 years ago, I had a fully loaded pistol in my mouth, ready to pull the trigger and end my life. Not because I wanted to die, but because I was completely exhausted from living in emotional pain and suffering for the majority of my life. I tried everything on the planet to get rid of, this feeling. And I couldn't pull the trigger. And, I look back on that, that day or that moment and realize that, I actually wanted to live. And because I didn't want to die and I wanted to live, I knew that I couldn't live the way that I was living. And so the night before I got sober, I hit my knees in a washroom.
Mm-hmm.
And because I knew I was going to die. If I kept drinking and I kept doing drugs and all that stuff, I knew I was going to die. I didn't want to die. And so, had this conversation with, something greater than myself, right? Most people call it God. I call it the universe. So I said to the universe, I said, like, I'm done, right? And I said, you can't put one more thing on my plate, because I said I'm full. And I was talking about trauma. I go, you can't give me any more trauma. Like, I'm full, I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of the conversation, I said, please take away the obsession to drink and do drugs. And, I went to bed. And, the next morning I woke up and, 5,812 days later, here I am sober. And I think the universe just wanted me to surrender, right? And me being on my knees in a washroom, I think was a good indication to the universe that, that I was ready to surrender and turn my will and my life over to the care of, God, Allah, Buddha, Jehovah, whatever the hell you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because healing is a 3-step process, right? It's emotional, it's physical, and spiritual. And, a lot of people, because I work in this space, a lot of people forget about the spirituality piece.
Right.
Right. And if you leave out the spirituality piece, you're never going to get sober. It's just plain and simple. And so, I started working on the emotional stuff. I was pretty good in the physical department. And the one thing that I was lacking was spirituality. And so 2009, I wrote a book about my life.
Mm-hmm.
And, that was the game changer. Because not only did I realize that I wasn't alone, and what happened to me wasn't uncommon. I found a space where not only could I heal, but I could also help other people heal by telling my story. And during the book tour, like, I got run over, like completely run over by people. Everywhere I went, 5, 10, 15, 20 people were coming up to the book table and telling me their story of sexual abuse. And it was really, the catalyst in, sort of changing direction. Mm-hmm. And really sort of stepping in to my purpose, the real reason, why I was put on this earth. And then realizing that, that all this trauma that I had experienced had built this incredible amount of adversity and resilience in me.
Yes.
Right. So, I always tell people to try to find the gift in the trauma. Like, what's the trauma trying to teach you? Right. Because God only gives us as much as we can handle. Right. And I find, and this is my own experience too, was I lived, the first half of my life in my trauma. I lived in the past.
Right.
Right. And, I don't have a crystal ball and I can't change the past. But what I can do is I can change the future. Right. And that's by living, a very spiritual existence one day at a time, because my sobriety is based on my spiritual condition one day at a time.
Let's really dig into when you said you wrote the book, and it sounds like it was very cathartic for you. You came up with the title Playing with Fire. Now, for those that don't know, Calgary Flames.
Yes.
Tell me, just picking the title and how it felt to finalize that book. What did it do for you? You noted about resilience and the ability to pick yourself up.
Yeah.
And that spirituality moment that many do have extraordinary outcomes with. Tell me a little bit about picking the title, and when you wrote that last chapter, what was it like? And did you have any idea that it was going to be so massively impactful across Canada?
Right. To be honest with you, that's the thing when you surrender, you just go with the flow,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you trust that the universe is going to take care of you, right? And so, everything happened quite quickly. I was retired hockey player. I'd opened up a business. I'd started writing this book, and 3.5 years later, the book's finished. And I remember about 4 days before I was going to Toronto to launch this book, like I was scared. Like I was scared because I had no idea what everybody else was how they were gonna react to what was in the book, right?
Yeah.
Because I was, it was all there, right, start to finish. Told the story the best way that I remembered it, could tell it, and I also knew that I was going to go do a whole bunch of media surrounding the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that the only thing the media would be interested in would be to re-victimize me at every opportunity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I spent 4 days on my computer researching every single thing I could find on the subject of child sexual abuse, because I knew nothing. I knew nothing other than I had my story.
Right.
And so I armed myself with a lot of information so that I could deflect them trying to re-victimize me in the interviews, right? And so, I went to Toronto. I did 300 interviews in the first 4 days that I was there. I was on every major news, sports channel, newspaper, magazine, radio, you name it. Like, it was big story.
Right.
And, I wanted to get a story of hope and healing and recovery out to the masses. I didn't want to wallow in the abuse, because I wanted people to see that you can heal from trauma. And so I got this amazing message out to the masses. And so the next thing on the docket was the very first book signing. And, my expectations for the book were really low. I thought I'd show up, sign 10 books, go to the next town, sign 10 books, and so forth.
Right.
Well, I show up at the biggest Indigo chapter store in all of Canada, downtown Toronto. It's like 3 levels. And, I walked through the front doors of the bookstore, and there was 400 people standing in line with my book.
What a blessing.
I'm like, what the hell are all these people doing here? I didn't expect this. So I sit down at the book table and I start signing books, and out of the corner of my eye, I spot this guy in line, and he's got my book clutched against his chest, and his face is buried in the floor, and he's walking really slow, and his sweatpants are ripped, and his t-shirt is dirty, and his hair is greasy. And I was just like, I wonder what's up with this guy. So I follow him all the way in the line. He gets to the front of the line, he puts the book on the table, looks me in the eye, and says, "Me too."
Oh.
And, that's when I knew the reason why I wrote this book. And like I said, after that first book signing, like I got run over.
You sure did. And like you said, you were on your knees,
Yeah.
and you become the victor to those people that read your book, that take the playing with fire as a moment for them to reflect on that past history that you shared, and that the future can be so different if there's someone like you that would be willing and have the guts and the resilience and the trust in the universe, as you say, to allow people to be okay and move that future forward. I want to ask you about the barriers that you had to break through as recovering both from the sexual abuse and the use of drugs and alcohol. What were some of those as you were working through your recovery and probably seeing, and probably will never get that vision out of your head about that man clutching your book as his last hope? What were your barriers?
Oh, geez. I think I was just naive,
Okay.
and, because I read the stat before, I went out on the book tour. 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 5 boys will be in some sort of unwanted sexual experience before the age of 18. And I go, if this is true, this is insane. This is insane. And, now being in this place now for almost 15 years, and, I've done 800 speeches in, 13 years.
Congratulations and thank you, because I can't imagine how many people's lives you have changed.
Yeah. And traveling, all over North America, speaking about, the stuff that everybody just wants to sweep under the rug, right? They don't want to deal with it. But it's truly been a lifesaver, a game changer, all of those things. And I'm always promoting to tell your story, and, you get to tell your story whichever way you want. Why? Because it's your story. It's nobody else's story. It's your story. You should be able to tell it whichever way you want. But unfortunately, we have that little thing called stigma. So, whether it's trauma, whether it's mental health, whether it's addiction, there is a ton of stigma attached. And that's what causes people to be apprehensive about, telling their story. But we also know that trauma gets stored in the body, right?
Absolutely. Well said. It does absolutely get stored in the body.
Yeah. And so, one of the first things you need to do is, God gave us a voice for a reason, and that was to use it. And a lot of people are apprehensive about using their voice, and they internalize everything, which causes, the body to be in stress. And, when the body's in stress, guess what we produce? We produce a chemical called cortisol. And cortisol is like acid in the body, right? And so those of us who already have, the gene, the mental illness gene, that causes our nervous system to even fray more and become more out of balance and all those things. And so that's why, relationship is so important, because the one relationship I denied the most through all of this was the relationship I had with myself, right? I hated myself. I didn't take care of myself, use drugs, alcohol, women, food, sex, gambling, you name it, to, sort of numb out from, these negative emotions that I was feeling. And, writing the second book, I realized that, I needed to be okay with who I was, be okay with the past and be okay with all of the things that I did. And so when I sort of grasped onto that concept of loving myself, taking care of myself, using my voice for good, all those things, I started to gain back a lot of the confidence and the shame. Like the shames started to disappear, started to dissipate, go away, and which made me even more determined to help as many people as I possibly could. And the only way that we can heal is through relationship.
That's really well spoken. And as you talked about conversations with a rattlesnake, both your titles are really, really well done. It sounds like that was a reflection book on you falling back in love with yourself, because you're right. Shame plays a very, very big role in our healing process. It also plays a very big role in trying to detoxify our bodies. And as you noted, cortisol is an impact to our healing process. The one piece is confidence. And you said that so eloquently, is confidence gets shaken really bad when you've been in these very difficult places. And
I'll tell you, when I was writing the second book, we had sort of an epiphany in the middle of the book, writing the book, and we discovered what trauma teaches us. That becomes sort of the core belief system that we have. And so first thing that trauma teaches us is abandonment and neglect. Second thing, and I would say 99.9% of the people I work with have this characteristic: I'm not good enough. Third, I'm not lovable. Fourth, do I even exist in the world? So those are the four things. And I was like, and the lady that I was writing with, she told me, she said, I can rewire those four things, right? Because every relationship I was in, I thought the person was going to leave me. Second of all, I never felt good enough, ever. Didn't feel lovable. And, spent, the majority of my 20s and 30s, being this famous person, but I was completely alone. I felt completely alone most of the time. I would be in a bar of 3,000 people and, feel completely alone, disconnected from, reality. And so, and then working through all those things, because that's about relationship with self, right? God's never going to abandon me. The universe is never going to abandon me, right? Good enough? Yes, I'm good enough, right? Look at all the things you've accomplished in your life. Look at, all your friendships, all the people who love and adore you, the real you, the person, that once I got, once I shed, several layers of skin, which is what a rattlesnake does, right?
That's why I love the title.
Yeah. And, and then, learning how to love myself, being okay with, who I am, right? And yeah, so, but I couldn't do that on my own, right? I couldn't do it on my own. And, trust, I had lots of trust issues. So I'm trusting in the universe to take control of my life and show me the path, right? That was hard, right? Because I don't trust. So, there was all of these layers, but ultimately, the biggest healing tool for me is helping is healing, right? The more people I've helped, the more I heal myself. It's pretty basic and simple, right? Because, mental illness is I got to get out of my head.
Right.
And into my heart space. Right. Because my head is lying to me all the time. It's making up shit that's never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So if I get into my heart space where compassion and empathy and forgiveness and all these wonderful things live, then I'm going to be okay. Right. And once I got into the heart space, I was unstoppable because I got out of my head. Right. And once I got out of my head and into my heart space, that's where, my purpose is in the heart space. Right.
That is a really important piece for the listeners to hear, is that our heart really does control so much of what we do, passion wise, motivation wise. There's been conversations with other guests on our show that talked about how the heart was driving all of the mind's thoughts when they were in balance. And it's an interesting thing, just talking about grief and some of the grieving that you had to go through to get to this space. Is grief is very hard and heavy in the heart space. And you opened it up with the trust and the willingness to alleviate a lot of that discomfort, not only in your body, but in your brain and the mental space that you had to open up. And as listeners to this show, our adjusted reality is just that. Theo Fleury could have drug that chair in his entire life and decided it was locked onto him and life is just this way. And, it's pretty depressing, but I'll just carry on. And yet you found that moment to say, no, I'm releasing myself from where I've been. I'm giving myself the courage to push forward past the barriers. I opened myself up in vulnerability extraordinaire. Like there's people that go to their therapist and they open up there, but you opened up to a whole entire country. And they looked at you and said, wow, thank you, Theo Fleury, for being the man who is willing to tell the story so raw, so real, and so important in today's world. That's why adjusted reality brings back the physical well-being and the mental well-being. And your story is incredibly important. I know you have so much more, and I know your time is extraordinary, but would you be willing to think back and tell our listeners if there was 3 action steps to really further their awareness and their ability to heal, whether they're physiologically suffering in chronic pain or they're mentally suffering with some past issues that have come up, or both, as in your case? What would you tell them to focus on? What 3 things would really make their adjusted reality experience more palatable to move through life?
Right. Well, I learned this in 12-step, and it's openness, honesty, and willingness.
Expand on those 3 so that when they get to that spot.
Yeah, to me, openness is being vulnerable, right? Vulnerability is the key to healing, right? If you hold all this stuff in, it's going to cause you tremendous amount of pain and suffering, whether that's physical, emotional, spiritual pain, and the first step of my process was telling my story, right? Using my voice. Honesty, just lay it out there. This is what happened, and I always say that there's no courage in judgment. There's no courage in judgment. So don't be afraid of the people who are going to judge you, because there's no courage in that, right? But there is a tremendous amount of courage in, first of all, telling your story. Second of all, asking for help. Asking for help doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're a person of tremendous courage. and willingness to do whatever it takes to get better, right? You know, to put yourself out there, right? Like I've done every kind of therapy known to mankind.
Love it.
You know, EC1 therapy, EMDR therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, group therapy, you know, all those things, you know, because when I do those things, I discover more things about myself, the wonder and the greatness of me. And everybody has that in them. Everybody has greatness. Everybody has, but the world continually, you know, tries to beat us down, right? Through judgment, through stigma, through all this stuff. And you know, my grandfather told me a long time ago that if I point one finger at you, guess what? There's three pointing right back at me, right? So
good job, Grandpa.
You know, so yeah, we can't be afraid, right? If we're afraid, we're just gonna, you know, stay in that proverbial cycle of, you know, trauma. And you know, and in the healing process, you're going to learn about compassion. You're going to learn about empathy. You're going to learn about forgiveness. All of those things that we were never taught, right?
Yes,
you know,
that's right.
Especially as a athlete, right? You know, we were taught, you know, that vulnerability is a weakness, you know, not a strength, right? And to me, my vulnerability is what, you know, what people are attracted to now, right? Is the way that I tell the story, the way that I approach what I do is, you know, the base of everything I do is vulnerability, right? Because you know what? Because vulnerability creates safety.
It does.
And then when you have safety, that's when the magic of healing happens, is when people feel safe, right? So, and we've done such a horrible job with creating that safe space in society. No wonder we're in a mental health crisis right now. No wonder we're in an opioid crisis, right? Is because there is nowhere where people can tell their story and not be chastised or judged or ridiculed, or, you know, that information gets taken and used, you know, against us, right? To further keep us where they want us.
So right? Truly important, especially when you have social media, which can be just so devastating, especially with our youth, seeing what's out there. And when you are vulnerable, it can be in places where it can really hurt. And I absolutely want to thank you. And you've opened a safe space for so many across America that will now help our listeners, help others as well as themselves understand that being open and honest and willing, that's what will make a difference. Finding the safe space that you opened up, that safe space across the nation to feel loved, safe, and able to be more resilient in their life. Theron, it has been an absolute honor to have you as a guest today. I'm hoping that we'll have you back for more information, because I know our listeners are going to love everything that you said today, especially those that are hurting physically or mentally or both. So thank you from Adjusted Reality for being a true and absolute stand-up, open, honest, and most importantly, willing guest today to share your story, share it with all of those that are hurting. We appreciate your story. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sherry. I appreciate, I always appreciate the opportunity to to talk about this stuff, because, it's not talked about enough.
That is true.
And
thank you.
Healing is possible.
It absolutely is.
Depending on how hard you want to work.
That's how we're going to end it today, that healing is absolutely possible. And you heard it here first with Theo Fleury. Thank you for joining us in today's episode of Adjusted Reality. Thank you for tuning into Adjusted Reality as we spoke to Theo Fleury about how he overcame the barriers of his past relationship traumas, both physically and as an NHL champion, but also mentally. Are you being open, honest, and willing to take charge of what is causing pain in your life? Help and hope is out there. This podcast was brought to you by the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress. As a special gift for listening today, you can visit f4cp.org/health. That's f4cp.org/health to get a copy of our Mind, Body, Spirit ebook, which focuses on many ways to optimize your health and the ones you love without the use of drugs or surgery. Don't forget to subscribe, share this podcast with family and friends, rate and review. If you're feeling inspired to learn more about chiropractic or find a doctor of chiropractic near you, visit f4cp.org/find-a-doctor. We appreciate your support and look forward to checking in with you again soon.